Let's start out today's video with a quote. "He was the best high school quarterback I've ever seen in my life. I expect him to be great, be a Heisman Trophy finalist, and be a first-round draft pick. That's how good I think he is." This was Michael Penix Jr.'s high school coach saying this. That is unbelievably high praise for a guy who is not ranked very highly coming out of high school. Michael Penix has been through a lot. He was only a 3-star recruit, was committed to an SEC school but got his offer pulled, and then would have to go to a program that was probably a top 3 worst Power 5 program in the country. Not only did he show extreme flash there, but he won a ton of games, but then right when things got good, he got screwed over again and would have to transfer to save his career. He reunited with his former coach, and now Michael Penix Jr. is on top of the college football world. He leads the country in passing yards, has had a ton of highlight plays, has been a big reason why Washington football has been insane, and will likely end up going to the NFL at this point. In today's video, we're going to talk about the insane rise of Michael Penix Jr., go through his entire career, how at one point it looked over, and ultimately how he saved it all. But before we get started, we're almost to 100K, so quickly be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like if you want to support today's video, turn on notifications so you never miss when I upload, and let me know what player, topic, team, or situation I can cover next. Now, let's get started and talk about the insane rise of Michael Penix Jr. Going back in time, Michael Penix Sr. said, quote, "Michael's very first steps as a baby, they were actually in the end zone. His first steps were right out there on the football field, right there in the end zone with me. How's that for a start?" Going back in time, Michael Penix's dad was a running back at Tennessee Tech, and then they decided to have their kid, which he named after himself. His nickname was Little Mike, and he was always running around with him, watching film, watching practice, hanging out with the players, and learning along the way. Instead of being a running back, Michael Penix Jr. always wanted to be a quarterback. Ever since then, he was finding the end zone. He was a prodigy as a kid, a coach's son who could throw and run like no one had ever seen, and later on, he was a high school sensation. He was the best player in the Tampa Bay metro area, and that area produces dozens of D1 athletes each year. He said he hated being labeled as a dual-threat quarterback because he loved to stay in the pocket and throw the ball, even under pressure. He didn't want to be labeled as a guy who scrambled. At first, Michael didn't play when he was in high school. That's why the family decided to move to a different school where he can get a different opportunity. He originally started as the 3rd-string quarterback, but after a week, 2 guys switched positions, saying that Michael gave them the best chance to win. That's insane. Just like that, Penix was the starting quarterback, and he scored 6 touchdowns in his first game, 3 passing and 3 rushing, and threw 22 touchdown passes before he threw his first interception. In 2 years, he threw for 61 touchdown passes with only 6 picks, passing for more than 4,200 yards, and was named the Area Player of the Year in 2017. He was recruited by a decent amount of big-time programs and decided to commit to Tennessee under Butch Jones, and he was super pumped. After Butch Jones was fired, both the athletic director and Jeremy Pruitt called him and told him that his offer to go to Tennessee was still good. But right before his official visit, he was told not to come and it was gone. What a stupid move in retrospect by Tennessee at the time, and they actually did the same thing with Adrian Martinez as they pulled his offer and he eventually went to Nebraska. Right now, Tennessee football's completely fine with Hendon Hooker, but man, having a guy like Penix probably would have helped them out during the Jarrett Guarantano era. After Tennessee pulled his offer, Indiana ramped it up even more. Nick Sheridan was Indiana's quarterbacks coach at the time, and then he got promoted to tight ends coach in 2020. Indiana was extremely interested in getting Penix's talents, and because Sheridan had such a good relationship with Penix, there was a very good chance that Penix would go there. But they'd have to hold off a couple of other good schools. Both Florida and Florida State would get involved in his recruitment, and his dad wanted him to go to USF. But Penix decided to take an official visit with Walt Phillier, a future NFL receiver who played for Indiana, and they both decided that Bloomington, Indiana was the place for them, and Penix committed to the Hoosiers. He was super pumped to get there, and he was a guy who was flying under the radar despite his talent and impressive offer list. 24/7 Sports listed him as a 3-star recruit, the number 21 pro-style quarterback, and the 548th best player in the class of 2018. So how would he end up doing at Indiana? When Penix arrived at Indiana, he was stuck behind Peyton Ramsey and Arizona transfer Brandon Dawkins. Penix would go through spring practice and would get an opportunity to play in 2 early games in 2018, and then he would take over as a starter against Penn State. He looked pretty good in that game, but unfortunately he tore his ACL and was done for the season. He finished the 2018 campaign, completing 21 of 34 passes for 219 yards and a touchdown. Indiana went along with Peyton Ramsey for the remainder of the season, but going into 2019, they saw Penix's obvious talent and decided to make him the starting quarterback. Many believed that the Hoosiers would finish at the bottom of the Big Ten, but Penix would break out. At the time, Kalen DeBoer was the offensive coordinator for Indiana, and he is now the head coach at Washington, so Penix had a pretty good season. He would combine for over 400 yards in a win over Ball State, had 2 touchdowns in a win over Eastern Illinois in Week 2, but would then be hit with another injury. He wouldn't play again until late September, when they would go on the road to play against number 25 Michigan State. In a 40-31 loss, Penix went off. He threw for 286 yards with 3 touchdowns and another score on the ground. He combined for 4 touchdowns, showing the immense potential he had. A couple weeks later against Rutgers, he'd throw for 3 touchdowns before he would get hurt again. He'd only play in 2 games the remainder of the season and finished the 2019 campaign with 1,394 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 4 picks, with 2 more scores on the ground. Peyton Ramsey would take over and lead Indiana to an 8-win season, which was extremely good for Indiana standards. Going into 2020, but led by Penix and his 2-star receivers Walt Phillier and Ty Freifogel, they would have an insane breakout season. In their first game, they would host number 8 Penn State, and in that game, Penix would lead them to a 36-35 win, which he had 2 touchdowns and his famous controversial 2-point conversion. Still to this day, no one knows if he got in or out, but it counted, and Indiana won. The next weekend, he combined for 4 touchdowns and a win over Rutgers before number 23 Michigan would come to town. In that game, he threw for 342 yards and 3 touchdowns as they would handily beat the number 23 Wolverines. After that, he threw 2 touchdowns and a win over Michigan State, and all of a sudden, Indiana was 4-0, Penix was playing at an elite level, and they would be put in a top 10 showdown with Ohio State. In that game, Penix would have arguably the best game of his career, as they would end up losing by 7 on the road against the number 3 Buckeyes, but he threw for 491 yards and 5 touchdowns. They even had an opportunity to tie or win the game, but unfortunately things fell short. But Penix had now established himself as a big name on the national stage, except he'd be hit with another roadblock. Midway through the game against Maryland, he'd go down with an injury and would miss the rest of the season. Jack Tuttle would take over and lead Indiana to a bowl game where they lose to Ole Miss, but once Penix went down, everyone knew the season was over. He threw for 1,645 yards with 14 touchdowns and 4 picks. He'd need to save his career in 2021, but just like last year, things would be difficult for him. Indiana was preseason ranked for the first time in forever, and they were matched up with number 18 Iowa on the road. Unfortunately for Penix, he'd have one of the worst games of his career, as he'd throw 3 interceptions, 2 pick-sixes, and they get blown out 34-6 against Iowa. This game symbolized the end of Indiana's newfound success and Penix's time there. He combined for 3 touchdowns and a win over Idaho, but then he struggled. He threw 3 picks in a loss to Cincinnati, barely beat Western Kentucky on the road, and then went 10 of 22 for an interception in a 24-0 loss to Penn State. After this game, Indiana lost the remainder of their games, Penix sat out the rest of the year, and everything was a disaster. Penix finished with 939 yards with 4 touchdowns and 7 picks. It was an extremely disappointing end to his Indiana career, and everyone had pretty much wrote him off, except Penix had a plan. He was going to reunite with his former head coach and save it all. After Kalen DeBoer was the offensive coordinator at Indiana in 2019, but he took the Fresno State job, and after doing terrific in 2020 and 2021, he was named the head coach at Washington. Jake Haener was originally going to transfer there, but he decided to stay at Fresno, opening a spot for Penix. He decided to return to Washington, where he beat out both Dylan Morris and Sam Heward for the starting job. Expectations were low for Penix and for Washington, but he has surpassed them in a huge way this year. Penix would end up making noise in his first career start, as against Kent State, he'd go for 345 yards and 4 touchdowns. He followed it up with over 300 yards and 2 scores the following week against Portland State, and all of a sudden, Penix was putting his name back out there. He'd have his first test as number 11 Michigan State would come to town, and in that game, he was just insane. He threw for 397 yards and 4 touchdowns without an interception, as they started out blowing out Michigan State, but the Spartans did eventually come back. At this point, Penix was near the top of every statistical area for a quarterback, and he entered the Heisman conversation. The following week, he'd throw for 2 touchdowns and a win over Stanford, before he'd have another test against an undefeated UCLA team. Unfortunately, in this game, Penix went off, but he had 2 costly interceptions, as they ended up losing 40-32. The following weekend, Penix had his worst game of the year, as he threw an interception in a 45-38 loss to Arizona State. At this point, it looked like Penix was coming back down to earth, but in his last 4 games, he has elevated his play once again and has re-entered the Heisman conversation, at least vaguely. Against Arizona, he'd throw for a career-high 516 yards and had 5 combined touchdowns. They would easily beat the Wildcats, and then he would throw for 374 yards and 2 scores in a road victory over Cal. After that, he'd throw for 300 yards in a close win over Oregon State, and then this past weekend, he went off again. In a huge matchup at number 6 Oregon, Penix would have a dumb interception early on in the game, but he would tie the game with just over 3 minutes remaining and would have over 400 yards and 2 touchdowns in a 37-34 win on the road against number 6 Oregon. Currently, he's thrown for 3,640 yards with 25 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. He's gone for over 300 yards in 9 of his 10 games, leads the country in passing yards, is near the top in touchdowns, has Washington ranked highly, and is now playing his way into the NFL draft scene. Everyone thought this year's quarterback class was going to be insane, but really, outside of Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, many people are wondering who those tier 2 quarterback candidates are going to be. Penix could easily play his way into that, as he has a great arm, is super athletic, has put up big time stats, and it seems has the mental intangibles to be an NFL quarterback. We're going to have to wait and see. But overall, it's been insane watching Michael Penix save his career. I'm super happy for him. The rise of Washington football has been fun, and I'm curious what's going to happen to him next. But what do you guys think? If you're a Washington or Indiana fan, what do you think of Michael Penix? Is he an NFL quarterback? And what player or topic should I cover next? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.